Quite amazing news on unemployment today, with the national rate dropping almost half a percentage point to 5.1%. That's lower than it was before the pandemic and all the lockdowns and the closure of international borders and all the rest of it. There was a surge of new jobs in the country across May, 115,000 new jobs. And I've got to say, the higher than expected increase in the minimum wage yesterday looks even more justified now, as surely we're going to start to see wages rise across the board, with the demand for labour now outstripping supply in some areas. This is terrific economic news for our country, and it's good for the government as well, obviously. There are a few threats, though, to continued economic growth and recovery. One of them must be us not opening up fast enough in the new COVID-19 world that we've spent a lot of the show talking about. Another, of course, is the reliability and pricing of electricity as pressures mount over climate change policy. Let me bring in National Senator for Victoria, Bridget McKenzie now, who joins us from Canberra. Thanks for joining us, Bridget. Great news on the jobs front, but one of the policy areas that really threatens economic growth and therefore employment, of course, is energy. And you got concerns about suggestions, really, that Scott Morrison has essentially nudge, winked up, signed up to net zero by 2050.
Yeah, Chris, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the IPA's just done a recent report that suggests over 650,000 jobs would be directly at risk in our economy as a result of pursuing zero emissions policy. You know, I think we're quite a smart species. I've always thought that technology will actually drive the solution towards climate change and lowering emissions. But the reality is, as a country, we seem to be blithely skipping down this path of international pressure towards a zero emissions future, which is really built on an international framework that favours countries like the G7, very rich, very industrialised economies, who all have access to nuclear power, zero emission fuel source and energy source, and who don't have economies like ours that are reliant on minerals, iron ore, thermal coal, etc., agriculture, to really underpin our way of life. And I think if we're going to subscribe to international agreements, we need to make sure that the methodology underpinning them favours us, or at the very least, doesn't actively discriminate against economies like ours, which seems to be the case. Yeah,
the debate's all a bit theoretical at the moment. It'll probably get a bit more direct over the next summer, but because we're talking about targets and there's no real discussion of the mechanism to get there, the real crunch is whether electricity prices continue to fall. There's been some encouraging developments there in the last couple of years. And also whether supplies are reliable. And I don't know that we've got enough confidence about supplies come next summer, for instance.
Well, look at my own home state of Victoria with your lawn out. We've got people without power upwards of a month now, which is just devastating. I think yes, electricity prices, our government's done a lot of work in this space across a raft of policy areas to bring downward pressure on electricity prices in this country. But at the end of the day, and we've had this remarkable uptake of renewables. We lead the world with solar panels on household rooftops. But at the end of the day, our manufacturing industries need to have access to reliable, affordable energy. And that, for us, at the moment and for the foreseeable future over the next 3 decades, is coal-fired power generation, followed closely by gas. Now, I would love to see a nuclear industry start up, because then we could actually have a zero-emission fuel source. But we can't even get that conversation started here in Australia. So I think we need to be very careful, and the Prime Minister's language, I think, has been very forward-leaning on this topic as he's been overseas. We need to make sure, as the National Party, he's very, very aware that there's 2 separate political parties in this coalition government, and one of them has very strong views on zero emissions and wants to understand where the impacts of that policy will come at, because it'll be our miners, our farmers, our manufacturers that end up paying the price for these sort of decisions. So until we see a plan, we won't be signing up to anything.
That's a bit of an ultimatum, really, isn't it? It's saying don't promise net zero to the UN in Glasgow. You can choose the UN or your coalition partner. You can't really have both.
Well, maybe you can't, Chris. And I mean, this is the discussion that we need to have because, we're being asked, I hope we're not being asked, but it does seem we're being asked to sign up to something sight unseen on a handshake that it's going to be okay and we'll make sure your people aren't affected. Well, you know what? We've been here before with Telstra. We've been here before on a raft of other policy measures. So we need to see the detail. The devil is always in the detail. And we need to make sure that this international framework that currently is voluntary, but we know it'll end up being mandatory, is not negatively impacting our national interests. We are a very unique economy. And right now, the rules are being written in Brussels that favour those rich industrialised G7 nations and doesn't take into account the unique specifics of our economy. So, for instance, Chris, like our thermal coal, right? We've got the largest thermal coal export port in the world in Newcastle. Our high calorific coal is lowering emissions around the world as every boatload goes off to developing countries. And yet the international framework that we're going to be asked to sign up for doesn't actually account for that in a positive way. So
indeed,
our bureaucrats and our country needs to be focused on getting the rules right before we sign up.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us, Bridget. I appreciate it.
Always.
We are a bit out of time there. Senator Bridget McKenzie there, a very strong warning to the Prime Minister not to go too far on climate or you'll lose the Nationals.